He came to pick up his son like he did every single day. He had no idea today would be different. In that classroom, something was about to happen that no one, not ever the teacher Gand, would fully understand until it was too late. He sat there for 2 hours, accused of something he didn't do Kang, and he still refused to say a single word against the boy who did. 3 years ago, this man destroyed everything he had. Today, he found out exactly what kind of son he'd raised instead. What this 8-year-old chose to do that day would remind his father why he never gave up Kaas, on him or on himself.
If you have ever held someone's hand a little tighter because life already took too much from you, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what this father discovers about his son's school day will change how you see every quiet parent standing outside those gates. And if this story moves you even a little, tap like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard by more people who still believe in second chances. Ethan Cole had learned to read the world through small details. The way a nail sat crooked in a beam told him a crew had rushed the job. The way his son's shoelaces stayed untied told him Noah had been in a hurry to catch the bus. The way his own hands shook slightly at 4 in the afternoon told him he hadn't eaten since 6 that morning. Ethan noticed everything now, because 3 years ago he had failed to notice the one thing that mattered most, and it had cost him almost everything. He was 35 years old, a construction foreman with calloused hands and a gray thread now running through his dark brown hair, though he was not yet old enough to have earned it. He wore the same faded navy jacket every day, the collar worn soft from years of use, over a plain gray t-shirt and jeans stained with concrete dust. His eyes were hazel, tired but alert, the eyes of a man who had learned to sleep lightly in case someone needed him. And someone always needed him. An 8-year-old boy named Noah, with tousled brown hair, a gap-toothed smile, and a dinosaur keychain clipped to his backpack that he refused to replace even though the paint had long since worn away. Their mornings had a rhythm Ethan had built with the same care he once put into framing a house, load-bearing, dependable, unlikely to collapse under pressure. 6:15, alarm. 6:20, coffee, black, in a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Cook," a joke gift from a coworker that had somehow become permanent. 6:30, wake Noah, gently, never with a shout, because Ethan remembered too well what it felt like to be startled awake by an angry voice in another room and had promised himself, the day the divorce was finalized, that his son would never wake up afraid in his house. Cereal, backpack check. The dinosaur keychain, always clipped to the same zipper, always checked twice. Then the drive to school, 10 minutes, filled with Noah's half-formed observations about clouds shaped like dinosaurs, or why the number 9 felt sneaky, or whether the school hamster was secretly a spy. Ethan treasured these 10 minutes more than almost anything else in his week, because they were proof, every single morning, that some part of childhood had survived the wreckage of the previous 3 years intact. He hadn't always been a man who noticed clouds or sneaky numbers. Before, he had been a man who noticed blueprints and invoices and the particular sound a truck engine made when it needed new brake pads. The man who noticed his son's small joys had been built slowly, deliberately, out of the ruins of the man who used to work 60-hour weeks without once asking himself what it was costing him at home. 3 years earlier, Ethan had a business. Not a large one, but his, Cole and Whitmore Construction, a partnership he had built from nothing with a man named Richard Whitmore, someone he had once called his best friend. They had met in trade school, worked side jobs together on weekends, and eventually pooled their savings to start a company that, within 5 years, had 30 employees and a reputation for honest work. Ethan had trusted Richard with the books. He had trusted Richard with his signature on contracts. And in the quiet, terrible way that betrayal often arrives, not with a shout but with silence, he had trusted Richard with his wife. He hadn't seen it. That was the part that haunted him most. He had been on job sites 60 hours a week, coming home to eat dinner cold and fall asleep on the couch, while his wife Melissa grew distant in ways he mistook for exhaustion. He blamed himself for the long hours. He blamed the business. He never once considered that the man cashing his checks and signing his paperwork was also sitting across the table from his wife on the afternoons Ethan thought she was visiting her sister. The truth came out the way truths often do, accidentally and all at once. It was a Thursday evening, and Ethan had come home early for once, hoping to surprise Melissa with dinner from the Italian place she loved. He remembered the exact weight of the paper bag in his hand, the way the steam fogged the inside of it, the small, ordinary happiness of a man about to do something kind for his wife. He remembered opening his laptop at the kitchen table to check a supplier invoice while the pasta stayed warm, and finding instead an email thread he was never meant to see, forwarded by accident to the wrong address, a mistake so small and so human that it unraveled 5 years of his life in the time it took to read 11 messages. There was no dramatic confrontation that night. Ethan remembered sitting very still at the kitchen table for almost an hour, the food going cold beside him, rereading the same sentence over and over as though enough repetition might change its meaning. When Melissa came home an hour later, she found him still sitting there, laptop open, and she knew, the instant she saw his face, that the life they had built was already over, even before either of them said a single word about it. What followed was not a single betrayal, but a slow unspooling of dozens of smaller ones, each one a thread Ethan had to pull to understand the whole. A hotel receipt tucked into a folder that wasn't meant for his eyes. A missed meeting that turned out not to be missed at all, simply relocated somewhere Ethan hadn't been invited. Within 2 months, Richard had drained the company's operating account into a shell business under his own name, dissolved the partnership using a clause Ethan hadn't read closely enough in the excitement of starting something he'd believed, foolishly, would last forever. And Melissa had filed for divorce, asking for full custody of Noah, then 5 years old. Ethan fought for his son with everything he had, and it was the one fight he refused to lose, even as he lost the company, the house, and nearly his sense of who he was. The custody battle stretched across 8 months, 8 months of borrowed suits for hearings he could barely afford to attend without losing a day's wages, 8 months of a lawyer named Gloria Reyes who took his case at a reduced rate because, she told him once, over coffee in her cramped office, "I don't often meet fathers who fight this hard for paperwork instead of headlines." Ethan hadn't understood what she meant until she explained. Most contentious custody cases she'd seen were driven by anger at the other parent. His was driven by something else entirely, a quiet, unshakable terror that if he lost, Noah would grow up believing that leaving was simply what people who loved you eventually did. The court ultimately granted joint custody, with Noah living primarily with Ethan during the week, a fact that surprised everyone except the judge, who had watched Ethan show up to every hearing on time, in work boots still dusty from a job, holding a folder of school drawings Noah had made for him as if they were legal evidence of love. In a way, they were. The judge had asked Noah, gently, in a private chambers meeting appropriate for his age, where he felt safest, and the 5-year-old had answered without hesitation, "Wherever Dad's boots are." Melissa had remarried within a year, to Richard. They lived now in a large house on the north side of town, the kind with a circular driveway and 2 cars that never seemed to age, while Ethan rebuilt his life one framing job at a time, working for other men now instead of for himself, renting a small 2-bedroom apartment where Noah had his own room decorated with dinosaur stickers they had put up together, laughing, on a Sunday afternoon that Ethan still counted among the best days of his life. He did not hate easily. He had tried, in the beginning, to hate Richard and Melissa both, and for a while it had fueled him, gotten him out of bed on mornings when nothing else could. But hate was heavy, and he had a son to carry on his shoulders, literally, at school pickup, when Noah was tired and didn't want to walk the last block to the car. Somewhere in the last 3 years, the hate had quietly transformed into something else, a fierce, focused determination to become the kind of father Noah would never have to explain or apologize for. Ethan didn't need revenge, he told himself. He needed Noah to know, beyond any doubt, that he was loved completely and chosen every single day. Which is why, on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, when Ethan pulled into the elementary school parking lot 15 minutes before dismissal, the way he always did, and saw Noah's teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, waiting for him at the front doors instead of the usual line of children, his stomach dropped before his mind could even form the question. Mrs. Alvarez had taught 3rd grade for 11 years. She was in her 50s, warm-eyed, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun, and she had a way of speaking to parents that made even bad news feel survivable. But today her expression was different, Careful, searching, the look of someone deciding how much to say and how fast. "Mr. Cole," she said, stepping toward him before he had even fully closed his truck door. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk before Noah comes out." Ethan's mind raced through every worst possibility in the half-second it takes a father's imagination to sprint toward catastrophe. "Is he okay? Is he hurt?" "He's okay," she said quickly, holding up a steadying hand. "He's safe. I promise you that first. But something happened today, and I think you need to know the whole story before you talk to him, because he's been very brave about it, and I don't want him to think he did anything wrong." She led him to a bench near the flagpole, away from the flow of arriving parents, and there, with the afternoon sun slanting gold across the schoolyard, she told him. That morning, during silent reading time, a boy named Tyler Whitmore, Richard and Melissa's son from Richard's first marriage, a boy Noah had never spoken about at home, had been going through backpacks in the coat closet while the other students read at their desks. He'd taken money from 2 other children's lunch accounts, a watch belonging to a girl named Priya, and when Noah walked in to grab his inhaler, Tyler had been caught red-handed. Instead of admitting it, Tyler had grabbed Noah's dinosaur keychain off his own backpack, the one Ethan had given him the week after the divorce was finalized, a small, cheap thing that had become, without either of them saying so aloud, a symbol of the two of them against the world, and shoved it into his own pocket. Then told the teacher's aide that Noah was the one stealing. For nearly 2 hours. Noah had sat outside the principal's office, accused, quiet, saying nothing in his own defense except one sentence, repeated calmly every time an adult asked him what happened. "I didn't take it, but I don't want to get anyone in trouble either." He would not name Tyler. Even after the school's hallway camera confirmed everything, Tyler entering the closet alone, Tyler's hand in the backpacks, Tyler transferring the keychain, even after the truth was undeniable, Noah had not said a single accusing word against the other boy. "I asked him why," Mrs. Alvarez said, her voice thick. "Do you know what he told me?" He said, "My dad says some people do bad things because nobody ever showed them how to be good. I didn't want to be the reason Tyler gets in more trouble than he already is at home." Oh. Ethan sat very still on that bench, the noise of the schoolyard fading into a dull hum around him. He knew Tyler Whitmore's home. He knew, better than almost anyone, what kind of man Tyler's father was. A man who had once looked Ethan in the eye every single day for 5 years while quietly stealing everything Ethan had built. A man who had taught his son, whether he meant to or not, that the world was something you took from rather than something you contributed to. And here was Noah, 8 years old, offering the son of the man who had destroyed his family a grace that Ethan himself was still learning to give. "Where is the keychain now?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "We recovered it. It's in Noah's backpack. Tyler's parents have been called, both of them," she added carefully, watching Ethan's face. "I understand there may be history there." "There's history," Ethan said. What happened next was not the confrontation Ethan might have imagined 3 years earlier, in the raw months after the betrayal, when he still lay awake rehearsing furious speeches he never intended to give. Instead, it was Richard Whitmore walking across the schoolyard 20 minutes later, in an expensive coat that did nothing to disguise how tired and gray he had become, to find Ethan standing by his truck with Noah's hand in his. Richard stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, neither man said anything. 3 years of silence sat between them like a physical wall, built from stolen money, stolen trust, and a marriage that had crumbled between them without either of them fighting fair. "I heard what Tyler did," Richard said finally. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much coming from me." Ethan looked at him, really looked, the way he hadn't allowed himself to in years, and saw not the villain of his worst nights, but a tired man whose son was, in his own way, drowning, the same way Ethan once had been. He thought of everything Richard had taken, the company, the house, 5 years of trust, a version of himself that used to believe people were mostly good. He thought about how easy it would be, right here in this parking lot, to finally say every word he had swallowed for 3 years. Instead, he crouched down to Noah's height. "Hey, bud, can you give me and Mr. Whitmore a minute? Go grab your backpack from Mrs. Alvarez, okay?" Noah nodded and ran off, and for the first time, Ethan let himself speak plainly to the man who had once been his best friend. You didn't just take my business, Ethan said quietly. You took 5 years I can't get back. You took the version of me that trusted easily, and I don't know if that man is ever coming back. I've hated you, Richard. I want you to know that because I think you should hear it from me and not imagine it. But I raised a son who just spent 2 hours protecting your kid from consequences he deserved, because that's the kind of man I decided to become after you showed me what kind of man I didn't want to be. So don't thank me. Thank him. And go figure out why your son thinks stealing is easier than asking for help, because trust me, that's not a school problem. That started at home. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes glassy in a way Ethan hadn't seen since they were young men celebrating their first signed contract together in a bar that no longer existed. You could have destroyed us just now, he said. Told the school everything. Told Melissa I've been struggling. You could have taken the win. I don't need a win, Ethan said. I needed my son to have a father who taught him better than either of us were taught. Looks like that part's done. He didn't shake Richard's hand. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as memory than as reconstruction. But he didn't walk away with fists clenched either. He walked away lighter, in a way he hadn't expected, as though some final weight he'd been carrying without realizing it had finally, quietly, set itself down. That evening, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment while Noah ate macaroni and cheese and recounted his day in the scattered, half-focused way 8-year-olds do, skipping the parts that mattered most and lingering on the parts that didn't. Bud, Ethan said eventually, Mrs. Alvarez told me what happened today. About Tyler. About you not telling on him even when you could have. Noah shrugged, focused on his fork. He looked scared, Dad. Like really scared. I know what that looks like. What? Ethan's throat tightened. How do you know what that looks like? Because that's how you looked, Noah said simply without looking up. Back when Mom and you were fighting all the time before we moved here. I used to watch you from the stairs. You look scared like that a lot. Ethan hadn't known his son remembered any of that. He'd worked so hard to shield him from it. The late arguments, the silent dinners, the year everything fell apart, and had told himself, in the exhausted logic of survival, that a 5-year-old wouldn't retain much of it. He'd been wrong. Noah had retained all of it, and rather than letting it curdle into fear or anger, he had somehow transformed it into the deepest kind of empathy a child could offer, the recognition of pain in someone else because he had once watched it in someone he loved. I'm proud of you, Ethan said, his voice unsteady. Not because you didn't get in trouble, because of how you treated someone who didn't deserve it, and did it anyway because that's who you decided to be. Noah finally looked up, macaroni cheese on his chin, entirely unaware that he had just articulated, in 8-year-old logic, a truth his father had spent 3 years fighting to learn. Are you gonna be mad at Tyler's dad forever? Ethan thought about the schoolyard, the tired lines on Richard's face, the 5 years of friendship that had come before the 5 minutes of betrayal that ended it. I don't think so, he said slowly, surprising himself with the honesty of it. I think I'm done being mad. Being mad was taking up room I needed for you. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep with a dinosaur book open across his chest, Ethan sat on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at a town that had taken so much from him and, somehow, given back more than he'd expected in the shape of one small, brave boy who chose kindness even when the world had given him every reason not to. He thought about the version of himself from 3 years ago, furious, gutted, certain that Richard and Melissa's betrayal would define the rest of his life. That man could never have imagined this evening, not triumphant, not vindictive, just quiet and full and enough. He thought, too, about all the parents who show up early to school pickup lines every day, sitting in their cars with radio static and worry, never knowing what small or enormous thing they're about to learn about their children, the bruises they hid, the kindnesses they offered, the courage they found in moments no adult was watching closely enough to notice. Parenting, Ethan had come to understand, wasn't a single dramatic rescue. It was 1,000 quiet Tuesdays, showing up 15 minutes early, staying steady when the story turned out to be harder than expected, and choosing, again and again, to build a person capable of more grace than the world had ever shown you. Word of what happened traveled quietly through the school, the way these things do. not as gossip but as something gentler, almost reverent. Mrs. Alvarez mentioned it without names in a staff meeting about character education. Priya's mother, grateful her daughter's watch had been returned and even more moved by the story behind it, brought Ethan a card the following week that simply read, "Thank you for raising a good kid in a world that doesn't always reward it." Ethan kept it taped inside his truck's visor where he could see it every morning on the drive to work. As for Tyler, something in him seemed to shift in the weeks that followed. Whether it was consequences at home, a long conversation with his father, or simply the unexpected mercy of a boy he'd wronged, no one could say for certain. But Mrs. Alvarez reported, weeks later, that Tyler had started sitting with Noah at lunch sometimes, quiet at first, then less so. Two boys born into two very different versions of the same broken adult story, finding their own way to write something better than what they'd inherited. Melissa called him 2 days later, her voice smaller than he remembered it, stripped of the practiced ease she usually wore like armor during their brief, businesslike custody exchanges. "I heard what Noah did," she said. "I heard what you said to Richard in the parking lot." A pause, long enough that Ethan almost thought the call had dropped. "I'm sorry. For all of it. I don't say that enough. I don't say it right." Ethan hadn't expected the apology, and for a moment he didn't know what to do with it. 3 years of rehearsed anger with nowhere left to go. "You don't have to apologize to me," he said finally. "You just have to keep showing up for him. That's the only apology that matters at this point." "I'm trying," she said. "Richard and I are trying to figure out where we went wrong with Tyler. It's not easy, seeing your own mistakes reflected back at you through your kid." "No," Ethan agreed quietly. "It never is." He thought of Noah on the stairs, watching arguments he thought no one saw, and felt the strange, humbling symmetry of two broken marriages producing two very different children, and wondered how much of that difference had simply come down to what each parent chose to do with their own regret. He didn't say any of that to Melissa. Some understandings are meant to be kept, quietly, for yourself. Ethan never fully reconciled with Richard, and he never needed to. Forgiveness, he had learned, was not the same as forgetting, and it did not require rebuilding what had been destroyed. It simply meant releasing the weight so both hands were free to hold what actually mattered. On weekends now, he and Noah rebuilt an old bookshelf together in the garage of the small house Ethan had finally saved enough to buy. Modest, imperfect, entirely theirs. Sanding the wood slowly, talking about nothing and everything. Dinosaur keychains swinging from Noah's backpack hook by the door. Months later, on a quiet December afternoon, Ethan found himself back at the same bench near the flagpole, waiting for Noah, the way he had 100 times before and would 100 times again. Mrs. Alvarez sat down beside him for a moment, watching the children file out in their winter coats. "You know," she said, "in 11 years of teaching, I've seen a lot of kids do the right thing when someone was watching. It's rarer to see one do it when he thought no one was." Ethan nodded, watching for the flash of Noah's red hoodie among the crowd. "I used to think the divorce broke something in him. Turns out it built something instead. I just couldn't see it while we were in the middle of it." "That's most of parenting, isn't it?" Mrs. Alvarez said. "Building something you don't get to see finished until years later, if you're lucky enough to see it at all." Noah spotted them and came running, backpack bouncing, dinosaur keychains swinging, and for a moment Ethan simply watched him. Not as a father cataloging worries for once, but as a man allowing himself to feel, fully and without qualification, proud. Proud of the boy. Proud, quietly and surprisingly, of the man he himself had become in the wreckage of everything he'd once thought he couldn't survive. That evening, driving home with the heater humming and Noah narrating an elaborate theory about whether the school hamster had a secret twin, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected to feel again so completely. Peace. Not the absence of pain. The betrayal would always be part of his history, a scar he could trace with his finger even years later, but the presence of something sturdier than pain, something he had built board by board, the same patient way he'd once built houses for other families, while quietly, without knowing it, rebuilding a home for his own. If there is a single thing this story asks you to carry with you, let it be this: the people who hurt us do not get to decide who we become. Ethan Cole lost a business, a marriage, and years of his life to betrayal, and still managed to raise a son who chose compassion over vengeance in a moment no adult was watching. That is not weakness. That is the quiet, extraordinary strength of choosing to be better than what was done to you, and passing that choice on to the next generation, one small, ordinary Tuesday at a time. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, a parent who kept showing up, a child who surprised you with their courage, or a version of yourself you're proud of becoming, share it with them, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one every week.